University College of London professor Susan Michie. And by the way, this is spelled like Michie, or at least that's what it looks like to me, but they say Mickey, so I'm assuming that's how it's actually pronounced. And she's been on television in Britain a number of times. She's basically all over the media in Britain. Now, she's a behavioral scientist or a behavior scientist that works over there. Basically, how can we propagandize people? How can we brainwash them? How can we influence them? She says this. I mean, she doesn't use those terms. She uses nicer sounding terms that mean the same thing. And how can we program people to do what we want them to do so that they respond the way we want? Now, the way she's been talking on TV, it's all been about COVID. But, you know, this lady, I'll give you an example, and we're coming to a point here, which is a great point that I want you to hear. But before we get to that point, I want to play a little clip of her on TV talking about how long we should be required to wear masks. And if you want to gander a guess on this one, you're probably right. When you hear from her, you might even have heard this story because it did make the news in a lot of areas, how long she thinks we should wear masks. And then the part that's so disturbing about this is, like any good Kamala Harris fan, she starts cackling about the whole situation like it's funny. This is hilarious. Listen here.
Vaccines are a really important part of the pandemic control, but it's only one part. Test, trace and isolate system, border controls are really essential.
Oh, border controls all of a sudden.
Is people's behaviour. That is the behaviour of social distancing, of when you're indoors, making sure there's good ventilation, or if there's not, wearing face masks, and hand and surface hygiene. We'll need to keep these going in the long term, and that will be good not only for COVID, but also to reduce other.
So when you say long term, sorry to interrupt, Professor Michie. When you say long term, what do you mean by that? How long? Very quickly.
I think forever, to some extent. Because
why didn't you say that? Oh, gosh, forever.
Well, I guess that is the long term. I mean, you know, if you're defining it, I would say forever belongs in the category.
And it is hilarious.
Oh, it's so funny, Professor Michie. What are you talking about? Forever?
You know what
for infinity.
You know what proper ventilation is code for, right?
What's that?
Proper ventilation is code for no AC, keep your windows open because it's global warming.
There you go. See, we can work all these issues in together. And like she said, this is not just good for COVID. It's good for all of our other problems. Remember, we've brought you the story where early on in the pandemic, I forget which journal it was. I mean, it wasn't the Lancet, but one of the journals had an article about how the mask really didn't do anything, but it was your talisman. Remember that wording, the talisman, essentially to make you feel better. That's exactly what people like Susan Michie are focusing on, is how can we control people's mindsets. Now, here's what I wanted to get to. This is her on Good Morning Britain. By the way, she gets let off the hook here, but I think you got to hear this because let's wonder, who is Susan Michie? And what has she been a member of for the last 40 years? Listen to this clip and see if you can answer that question.
Although hospitalisation is still low, it's rising. And further lifting restrictions will mean that rises even more in a situation where NHS staff are exhausted and we've got a huge backlog waiting list of urgent procedures that need to be done.
Well, the logical extension of everything you just said would be that you think that we shouldn't lift restrictions at all on the 19th and we should carry on exactly as we are. Am I right? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, lifting restrictions will increase transmission. And with all the problems that I've just talked about, it doesn't seem to me the best time to do that.
All right, so
in
you're
fact,
saying we should stick...
if you remember a few weeks ago, we actually postponed lifting restrictions because the situation was so serious.
Listen to this question.
But the situation's even more serious now than it was then.
Listen, there's a point I really have to put to you, and you'll be aware of this, because there's been a lot of commentary about this in the British media, about you. And it's to do with your politics. And you know I'm going to ask you. You've been a member of the Communist Party for about 40 years now. You're still a member. And we know that communism is basically statist. We look at communist countries around the world and we see that they are tremendously top-down dominant and control societies that they rule over. And I just wonder, and I'm putting this question on behalf of those who wonder about your politics, if your politics actually informs your sense of control. It's not just the medical arguments, but you have a kind of a political bent to want the state to tell people what to do.
I've come on your programme as a scientist, as do all people who come onto your program as scientists. They come on to talk about the evidence, relevant theories, how we approach our scientific disciplines. And you don't ask other scientists about politics. So I'm very happy to speak about science, which is what my job is, and to limit it to that.
So you're saying that your politics doesn't inform your opinion on this subject?
I'm saying that I agree to come on this programme as a scientist, and I'm very happy to talk to you about the issues that you're raising as a scientist.
So I guess the answer is yes. I mean, because if your politics didn't inform your scientific opinion, you could just say no. You could just say no. Wouldn't that be so simple? And notice she didn't deny. I mean, you can't deny it. She's a card-carrying communist. One of the top, and we got to put scientists in quotes here. I mean, look, behavioral science, that's a legitimate field of study. I'm not trying to delegitimize it, but it is not science in the same sense that chemistry, physics, or even high-level mathematics is, or dealing with quantum states, which we're hoping to get to later in the show. It's not a science on that level. It's much more of an art than a science, because there is no single way that anybody responds to anything. So behavioral science is really a little bit of what we might call a soft science, if we want to call it a science. But she falls back on that. Hey, I'm a scientist. I'm here to talk about science. No, you're a propagandist. You get put on the air to propagandize people. And now thankfully, this guy, by the way, after she said that, he backed way off. He said, well, that's a perfectly legitimate answer. No, it's not. This lady's a card-carrying communist. She's trying to propagandize everybody. She says you'll never be able to take your mask off. You can't take off your face muzzle ever. And you'll be lucky if we allow you to keep speaking, right? Because the communistas in charge, you don't get to just say whatever you want. You insult these people, you wind up in jail or just disappear. That's what happened all over Eastern Europe. That's what happened in China. That's what happened in Russia. Look what happened in Hong Kong just a couple of years ago. The pattern is so obvious, but people don't seem to notice it by and large because everybody's letting it happen here in our civilized societies. It's happening here in the UK, in the U.S., in what were formerly Western democracies or Western republics, however you want to call them, places where people had a vote, had some rights, had a voice. That's the exception to the rule over the history of this planet, by the way, for folks to have these rights, to have a voice, to be able to speak, to have a vote. These are exceptions. This was different. I hope you guys understand that. If we lose this, it's gone probably for good. I mean, it hasn't existed throughout the history. It is not the natural order of things, at least according to what history would teach us. So many more angles to these stories, too. I don't know if you saw this, but I saw a story out from the Israeli Health Ministry, and they should know, by the way, since they have one of the most highly vaccinated populations in the world, which is my understanding is only about 60% vaccinated, which tends to tell me that the numbers that they like to throw around about the U.S. probably are not accurate, saying it's 70% plus here in the U.S., fully vaccinated. I don't think that could be accurate if in Israel it's only about 60%, because, you can't even go to Israel right now without your vaccine card. And there's no suing them in a Florida court saying they're violating Ron DeSantis's, no vaccine check rule, which passed by the Florida legislature, of course. But the point of this story I wanted to get to is the Israeli Health Ministry has now said that the efficacy of the Pfizer vaccine against COVID, which previously had the highest alleged efficacy of any of them. It was previously said to be 99%, and then it was like 94.5%. You know what it's down to now? 64%.
Because they want you to get the other shot.
Exactly. I was just going to say, just in time for their booster shot.
This is, that's it. They want you to get the third shot, because this is, if you've had both shots, it's 64% effective. So now you got to get the third shot. Now you're going to have to get a shot every year. Now you're going to get a shot every 6 months. Now every 3 weeks. It'll just keep increasing. And they just keep, and again, just follow the science, right? What do they know? They don't seem to know anything. Meanwhile, we've got stories coming out, and these were forwarded to us by several of our listeners, actually. And this is stories about door-to-door groups that will go around and check to see if you've got your vaccine on behalf of the local health department. And we understand this is occurring in parts of the country. I don't think it's happening in Florida, but I can't say that.
They came to Town and Country to my mother-in-law's house.
Did they really?
Yes.
I've heard rumors of that. But you just wonder who these people are. Well, we've got an actual script that was put up on the web by Lake County, Illinois, and this is their script for their door knockers. And it tells you things like, ignore no soliciting signs because you're not trying to sell anything. Hey, by the way, that's not what soliciting means. It doesn't mean only trying to sell something. It means coming to my door and bothering me when I didn't invite you. That's what no soliciting means. But they say ignore those signs. They say have the attitude of a golden retriever but the memory of a goldfish. I mean, this is such helpful info. I mean, the attitude, I mean, they're just like the infantilization of our making us into children.
Can I take that
of
sales
our messaging?
Class? Can I take that sales class?
Yes. Well, you're like a golden retriever, Roxanne. Just keep smiling. Keep smiling and
wagging my tail.
Licking people on the face. Hey, that sells. That sells ads, Pat George. You make a funny face, but that sells.
But no, that spreads COVID, too, licking people on the face.
Okay. Well, keep your mask on. So, report your work. That's the most important part of this, right? Report your work as you go door to door and ask people. And then don't forget to have fun. Don't forget to have a little fun with this. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.